Tel Aviv, where Secretary of State Antony Blinken is speaking to the press after his visit with Israeli officials and the others in the Middle East region.
Needed to be worked through, but that the United States was committed to achieving these goals. Today marks the 7th day of the humanitarian pause in Gaza that the United States worked closely with Israel, Qatar, and Egypt to put in place. The 7th day that hostages have been freed and are returning home to their families. The 7th day that significantly more humanitarian assistance is getting into the people of Gaza who need it. And the 7th day that civilians in Gaza have been able to move to safer areas. I've come again here today to advance a number of goals. Our immediate focus is working with our partners to extend the pause so that we can continue to get more hostages out of Gaza and more assistance in. We share the elation, the relief of the families from more than a dozen countries, including the United States, who've been reunited with their loved ones. And yet, there are scores of family here in Israel, the United States, and around the world whose loved ones continue to be held captive and who are desperate to get them home safely. We will not stop working until we get every hostage back home with their families and loved ones. At the same time, we continue to surge humanitarian assistance to Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Together with the UN, our partners in the region, we have significantly increased the flow of food, water, medicine, fuel to power desalination plants, hospitals, and other critical infrastructure. Just over the past week, the mechanisms that we helped to negotiate and implement have more than doubled the number of trucks getting into Gaza. But this is still not enough to meet the needs of its people, which is why we continue to work urgently to get more aid in and to get it in faster. Sustaining and increasing the flow of humanitarian aid, in particular fuel, restocking stores with commercial goods, these are vital to the lives and livelihoods and well-being of men, women, and children. That's especially true for the most vulnerable parts of the population: children, the elderly, pregnant women, people with disabilities. And it's even more pressing as winter sets in, bringing with it a heightened risk of infectious disease outbreaks. The government of Israel agrees with the imperative of humanitarian assistance and the need to sustain it. Prime Minister Netanyahu also made clear that Israel intends to resume its military operations against Hamas when Hamas stops releasing hostages. As we've said from the outset, Israel has the right to do everything it can to ensure that the slaughter Hamas carried out on October 7th can never be repeated. Hamas cannot remain in control of Gaza. It cannot retain the capacity to repeat that carnage. That was only underscored by this morning's appalling terrorist attack on people waiting at a bus stop in Jerusalem, which killed 3 Israeli civilians and wounded at least 6 others, including 2 American citizens. Hamas has claimed responsibility for that attack. It called its perpetrators heroic. We mourn those killed, just as we mourn the loss of every innocent civilian life, Israeli or Palestinian. But as I've also said since I first came here after October 7th, the way Israel defends itself matters. It's imperative that Israel act in accordance with international humanitarian law and the laws of war, even when confronting a terrorist group that respects neither. In my meetings today with the Prime Minister and senior Israeli officials, I made clear that before Israel resumes major military operations, it must put in place humanitarian civilian protection plans that minimize further casualties of innocent Palestinians. That means taking more effective steps to protect the lives of civilians, including by clearly and precisely designating areas and places in southern and central Gaza where they can be safe and out of the line of fire. It means avoiding further significant displacement of civilians inside of Gaza. It means avoiding damage to life-critical infrastructure, like hospitals, like power stations, like water facilities. And it means giving civilians who've been displaced to southern Gaza the choice to return to the north as soon as conditions permit. There must be no enduring internal displacement. All of this can be done in a manner that still enables Israel to achieve its objectives. Of course, we know that every one of these elements is made more complicated by the fact that Hamas intentionally embeds itself with civilians, within and below hospitals, schools, apartment buildings, refugee camps. But Israel has one of the most sophisticated militaries in the world. It is capable of neutralizing the threat posed by Hamas while minimizing harm to innocent men, women, and children. And it has an obligation to do so. Ultimately, that's not just the right thing to do, it's also in Israel's security interest. The Prime Minister and members of the War Cabinet agreed with the need for this approach. We discussed the details of Israel's ongoing planning, and I underscored the imperative to the United States that the massive loss of civilian life and displacement of the scale that we saw in northern Gaza not be repeated in the south. As I told the Prime Minister, intent matters, but so does the result. At the same time, Hamas has choices too. Hamas could immediately release all of the hostages it holds. It could stop using civilians as human shields and stop using civilian infrastructure to stage and launch terrorist attacks. Hamas could lay down its arms, surrender the leaders who were responsible for the slaughter, the torture, the rapes of October 7th. Hamas could renounce its stated goal of eliminating Israel, killing Jews, and repeating the atrocities of October 7th again and again and again. Meanwhile, everyone around the world who cares about protecting innocent civilians, innocent lives, should be calling on Hamas, indeed demanding of Hamas, that it immediately stop its murderous acts of terror and deplorable use of innocent men, women, and children as human shields. In our meetings with Israeli leaders here and in Jerusalem, and Palestinian leaders in Ramallah, we discussed our continued focus on preventing the conflict from spreading, whether to the West Bank, to Israel's northern border, or to the broader region. I raised our deep concerns about steps that could escalate tensions in the West Bank, including extremist settler violence and proposals from parts of the Israeli coalition government to further expand settlements. I made clear our expectations about addressing these issues. We also focused on what we can, what we must do now to prepare for the day after the conflict, to create the conditions for a durable and lasting peace, building on the principles that I set out a few weeks ago during the G7 meeting in Tokyo. Breaking out of the cycle of violence, the cycle of conflict, ensuring Israel's enduring security, demands improving the lives of Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank in immediate, tangible ways, and providing them with a credible path toward their legitimate aspiration for statehood. In our ongoing conversations with Israeli, Palestinian, and Arab leaders, we'll discuss practical steps to make real a just and lasting peace, and what each of us is prepared to do to help achieve it. We have no illusions this is going to be easy. We will surely have disagreements along the way. But if we're going to move forward on practical steps toward lasting peace, lasting security, we have to be willing to work through these disagreements, because the alternative, more terrorist attacks, more violence, more innocent suffering, is unacceptable. That's why the United States is here, and we're leading toward this goal.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.